Share via email. Report story. By Encyclopedia. Summary. In the crystal clear waters of the South Pacific lies a spit of sand, rock, and palm trees nestled between a rainbow of coral reefs. Some may call this paradise, but Ochako calls it a lifesaver. Ever since she was separated from her pod and marooned here during a deadly cyclone, she has made the most of it, alone. The surrounding corals are teeming with tasty food items and the sheltered lagoon has become her home base. When another storm hits, Ochako is better prepared, but she can't say the same for everyone. The following morning, Ochako finds debris washed up on her shores, as well as a human. Ochako knows to keep her distance. Humans have been unkind to merfolk throughout history, or so she had been told by the elders in her pod. But this one seems harmless. He's definitely alone and definitely unsure of himself as he wanders the tide like a newborn babe, confused and in need of some guidance. Ochako decides she will be that guidance from a distance. After all, if she keeps herself hidden in the waves, then nothing can go wrong, right? Note: I've read lots of Izuocha's mermaid stories, but this one is the best. Equals 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 dot. Chapter 1. Gentle wave breaks invade her dreams, sweeping over pristine beaches white as the fluffy clouds that hang overhead. The call of a gull stirs her enough to open her eyes, enough to catch the pool of cerulean rising and falling below her. Slowly, it builds into larger waves tumbling over themselves, spreading across the sand before retreating for another go. Ochako stares for a beat, her eyes open just slightly. Even as a denizen of the sea, the rhythmic breath of the South Pacific is mesmerizing in all its shades of blue. This spot, a layered bed of rock jutting out from the lagoon towards the open sea, made it hard to move around enough to do much of anything. The cool, sea spray keeps her just cool enough to counteract the way the tropical sun cooks her skin in the stone. Ochako curls her tail around herself in an attempt at sleep once again. It is no use. The calls of the birds overhead and the constant rolling of the waves intrude upon her thoughts. She moves the translucent pink tail flukes away from her face and stretches with some annoyance, pushing herself up from the stone and arching her back as a seal would before settling back down to look out south to the horizon. Her view is framed in rock, the outcrops of her lagoon layered and protective of the secret beach within its horseshoe shape. Water as clear as crystal and calmed by the rocks before entering, rolls up the sand bank behind her gently, delivering sand and shells with it, among other curious things on a blue moon. Behind the rock walls of the lagoon rise palm trees that sway in the southern trade winds, coaxing ripe coconuts to tumble down the rock face and split conveniently before landing within her reach. Beyond this tiny island lies the vast ocean. Sprinkled across the blue horizon, other islands, just as quiet and beautiful as her own, lie out in their mystery. They almost appear close enough to swim to, but Ochako knows better. They are many, many miles away, too many miles for one merfolk to swim without the aid of her family, her pod. Not only that, but deep, dark channels snake between the tiny oases of coral and sand, hiding dangers in the navy shadow. The risk isn't worth it, especially not today. Looking to her left, the sky darkens from a brilliant blue into an ominous gray. Although the storm is far off, perhaps pummeling one of those islands in the distance, its strong winds strike her now, chilling her to the bone. She shivers. Such a storm is the reason she was here. Alone. She was lucky to be alive, lucky to have a second chance to prepare correctly this time. So, without a second thought, she quickly grabs her palm purse, a bag she'd fashioned herself out of a palm frond, before facing the water. Taking a deep breath, she dives off her rock into the water with a kerplunk. The bubbles rise back up to the surface in a hurry, but Ochako stays submerged, surveying the lagoon from underneath. Seagrass and algae line much of the rocks and sand here. As secluded as it is, she knows for certain that the lagoon is not the place to ride out the storm. A few bubbles escape her mouth as she exhales tiredly, coming to the conclusion that she needs to find somewhere else to hide from the wind, rain, and swells the storm was sure to bring. Promoted stories. You'll also like. After all, Omfluke 11.4K 802. Will edit once I'm free. N. This is a work of fiction, and any similarity with other works is purely coincidental. Excuse grammatical errors and misspellings, Eng. Much needed love Yandere Succubus Momo X Izu, 51.1K807 after Wattpad. Had decided to delete this story out of nowhere, I and many reader were distraught. So I'm making a remake of the story from the ground up to compensate. Siro Deku Onishots 31.4K791 Because of circumstances, this book won't be continued unfortunately. Feel free to check out my other stuff. Thank you for understanding. Hurt cuz I love you to death Izuocha, ha. 8.7K141 Class 1A is now Class 2A and is working to be better heroes due to events that had happened before. Deku has gotten strong feelings toward Uraraka during the summer as Convicted Hearts 3600 like my other story but ILI longer. The Kings and Queen Yandere Wakfu X Reader 56.7K 1.8 Kyonder. Wakfu X Reader. Images do not belong to me unless stated. Wakfu does not belong to me, it belongs to Enigma. This is being rewritten in another book on my profile. Mirko X Shy Male Reader 168K 1.1 Key. Don't own MHA. I hope you enjoy the story I made. Fortunately, Ochako knows her island very well. Upon arriving here, she'd done a full lap around the sandy beaches, finding a sea cave on the southwest side of the island. She'd never used it before, but she'd kept it in her memory for just an occasion. No matter how much she'd dislike it having gotten a second lease on life, she isn't about to be ignorant or unprepared again. She is a grown merfolk, and she is going to act like it collecting an empty clam shell from beside her lounging rock. Ochako leaves the lagoon, passing by the stone pillars, like an archway that leads out to the reef. Beyond the rocks, the seagrass gives way to a city of coral, their colorful towers reaching towards the sky. Ochako breaks the surface once more for another breath before diving again. Passing over green table corals, her shadow surprises a group of Anthea's fish out from their hiding places. They scatter before they circle back to include her in their school. They must think she is one of them, Ochako muses, what with their tails sharing the same brilliant hues of swirling pinks, yellows, and purples, the translucent flukes sporting trailing edges. A few of the fish nip at her scales, no doubt removing unwanted hitchhikers Ochako hadn't noticed. She slows down for the fish to finish, hanging in the water column as the Antheas perform their duty. She takes this time to scan the reef. The sun is still out, sending stripes of light dancing over the coral. She can feel the current, a slight tug that threatens to pull her out to deeper water, signaling the continued ebb of the tide. She isn't expecting any large sharks to enter at this time, but Ochako knows better than to believe the only dangers the reef harbors are big and obvious. As the Anthias leave her, Ochako approaches a peculiar patch of sand. A number of small holes dot the bed, curling sand grains at their edges. Clams. Or so Ochako hopes. Using her empty clam shell, she digs at one of the holes, unearthing a perfectly white clam. Plucking it from the sand, she quickly drops it into her purse before digging for another and another. Foraging was easy once she'd learned the culture of the island. Every coral patch had its own community, like little neighborhoods, and the sand patches around them were prime real estate for burrowing morsels. Still, Ochako kept her guard up. A dangerous adversary crawls along the sand without a care in the world, and Ochako knows to be cautious of him. With every sand patch she scours, she keeps a lookout. She never lets her fingers go too deeply into the sand. If she and her enemy were to go after the same clam, he'd certainly win and claim her as well if she wasn't careful. Upon the fourth sand patch, after diving from the surface with a fresh breath of air, she spots him, a flabby thing crawling slowly on the sand with a cone-shaped shell upon his back, dotted in black and white with flecks of gold, where he hid his deadly stinger, the cone snail. Ochako had watched her father deal with these before, using a clam shell to gently pick up and toss the snail elsewhere, but she didn't feel it necessary to take the risk. The snail could have his sand patch. As Ochako moves on, the reef sinks deeper and the water becomes cooler, the upwelling from the deep channels between islands bringing up cold, sun-deprived water to the shore. Now was the time to keep her head up and alert, rather than down in foraging mode. The deeper blue water welcomes larger animals closer to shore, like dolphins and sharks. As she approaches the dark granite cliffs of the western side, a unicorn fish rushes by her. His green-gray body gleams with the spare rays of sunshine that snake over his skin and his long horn that erupts forward from between his eyes. He stops to hover over the rocks, regarding her for a moment before dipping his head to pluck at algae. Ochako can feel the saliva rush into her mouth, what she wouldn't give to catch him. But he is too smart. Those large eyes are focused on her, waiting for her to dart towards him. He'd be too fast, Ochako knows. She has no way of holding onto him anyway. With a slimy body, she may have opted to hold him by the tail stalk if he wasn't displaying two prominent knife-like spines there. Ochako moves on. It would be clams forever, at this rate. An exhale escapes her mouth as a large bubble in the frustration of it all. It does nothing to assuage the boredom of a monoculture diet, and she follows the bubble to the surface in an effort to remove her hungry eyes from the fish toying with her. Ochako forgets her limited dinner options as she notices the sky has grown darker. How many hours had she been foraging? Now the storm was closer. Breaking the surface tension, she exhales and then draws in a sharp breath. Even with the natural shadow cast by the towering cliffs before her, she still notices the difference in the sky, now gray and growing darker. The wind has picked up and pushes the waves into even more violent peaks by the minute. Ochako beats her tail, riding the surf as it crashes into the rocks. The landing isn't soft, and she groans as another wave smacks her back and salty water rushes into her mouth, threatening to dive into her lungs. She spits and groans again. There was a reason this location was only used for emergencies. Climbing the rocks while holding her bag of clams and jeered by the ocean itself, Ochako uses all of her strength to pull herself up into the sea cave. The muscles in her shoulders and arms feel numb as she lies down on the cave floor, the strange overuse radiating through her being as she draws in breath after breath to return to some kind of comfort, despite the inhospitality of the place. The sea cave is little more than a dark crevice in the rock face, tight sitting just above the high tide line. Waves crash harder upon the rock below, spitting seawater into the cave, leaving the floor and walls wet enough to support a slime layer of algae growth. The mermaid scrapes some of the green slime off her forearms and lets it drip from her hand onto another rock with a sickening sort of plop. She grimaces. It is going to be a long night. Settling into the bed of algae as best she can without thinking too much about it, she wraps her tail around herself in a bid for some warmth. Dark, gray clouds smother the sun completely and cast the sea cave into a deep darkness that coaxes her eyelids closed into a light slumber. The rain begins, and in no time it is pelting the rock face as if each drop is actually a small stone. Ripples on the surface of the ocean beyond are melded into stronger swells. Despite the cold, damp space around her, the safety of it feels cozy, and she allows herself to drift in the sound of pounding rain and waves. But the storm outside refuses to be ignored. A bolt of lightning bright as the sun makes Ochako jump out of her slumber, and the whistle of the wind through the crag keeps her awake. She groans, trying to settle deeper into the mat of seaweed slime on the cave floor, an attempt to find that cozy spot now lost. Another crack of lightning pierces the sky as if it could break it open. She jumps again, the sound reverberating through her skin to her core. It is so bright, Ochako can see clearly across the strait to the nearest island. And an object equidistant from both islands floating out in the rough surf. Ochako shakes her head, eyes scrunched tight before looking again. Despite the shiver of fear running through her memories of the other storm that put her here, her curiosity grabs her attention more. But now it is dark. She waits. The storm is right on top of her island now, all it would take to see is. Another bolt of lightning cracks across the sky, and Ochako gathers all of her courage to keep her eyes open and looks for the floating object. The white bolt escapes the clouds and descends to the ocean in a loud explosion. It hits the object out on the waves in a dramatic show of power. A fire is left like a smoldering scar from where the lightning had struck, leaving a bright orange glow out there for Ochako to track. With every lightning strike, Ochako can see the object better and better. A wooden hull, now on fire. White sails torn by the wind. Glass windows reflecting the storm's rage as it sends wind and rain to batter the planet beneath. A ship. Ochako recognizes the object as a ship, an object that always meant one thing: humans are coming. She doesn't realize she'd moved to the edge of the cave entrance to get a better look, and upon her discovery, quickly shrinks back inside. Humans meant trouble. Always. Except, right now, she figures their greatest concern is getting the fire under control, or perhaps not taking on too much water, or perhaps avoiding rogue waves that reach out like the tentacles of a kraken to drag them under. They wouldn't notice her from so far away. The orange glow from the fire dances in the black space between lightning bolts. With each light show, she watches as the situation on the ship becomes more and more dire. Even from so far away, she can tell the fire is only getting more wild, and the ship, getting tossed around as it is, would eventually sink. She felt a twinge of guilt. It was true she was a better swimmer than a human, but she had no desire to put herself in harm's way for them. Swimming in those swells was a death sentence for anyone, even a fish. How could they not have known this storm was coming? Then again, there had been a time when she had been that careless. Her whole pod had been. They thought they could beat the storm. They could make the trek, and then hunker down. She shook the memory away. Ochako knew better now, but at what cost? It would be the same for these humans. If any of them survived, perhaps then they could learn that same hard lesson, perhaps. The orange glow suddenly disappears into the blackness. It is so quick, Ochako jumps up onto her arms to look closer. It's no use. With another bolt of lightning, the light only reveals the empty strait. There is nothing left, and Ochako settles back down on the mat of slimy algae, still staring out at the raging waves, waiting for the ship to make a surprise reappearance from the murk. But it doesn't. It's gone. The far-off call of gulls on the wind stirs Ochako from her sleep that next morning. Stretching, she groans as the cold, damp feeling of slime enters her consciousness. With the storm past, she grabs her untouched pouch of clams and scuttles out of the sea cave, diving into the crystal clear waters below. Back to sand, sun, and salt. She hits the surface with a loud splash. The bubbles rise, and she's greeted by the sunlit reef in the distance, its beauty a mosaic of colors through the blue. She swims out towards it with every intention to eat her haul of clams from yesterday on her favorite perch back at the lagoon. However, as she swims along, she sees the evidence of the storm on the reef. Broken coral heads, the scarcity of fish, bits and pieces of foreign debris. The ship. The memory comes into focus as Ochako inspects a large plank of wood not from any tree she'd ever seen nestled between broken coral wedges. As she swims on, the evidence of the sunken ship becomes ever more apparent. Objects she'd never seen before rock in the current upon the white sand beneath her. Unsurprisingly, she isn't the only curious inspector this morning. In the distance, she sees the unicorn fish nipping at something lying on the sand, and she bats him away with a shoo. Shoo. Startled, the oval-shaped fish heeds her request and darts away over the coral as Ochako takes a closer look. The object is rectangular in shape, and upon touching it, she can tell it's bound in a strong, thick material that feels smooth to the touch, like the hide of a dolphin. Ochako isn't sure what it is at first, but she picks it up anyway to bring it back to her lagoon. That, and a few other interesting objects that deserve a closer inspection. Once back at her favorite rock, Ochako isn't sure what to make of the objects. She recognizes some as similar items her family had collected over the years. A spoon, a small clock cloaked in gold. And she knows the off-white sheets between the animal hide is paper. There's also a lock on the binding holding it closed, and no matter how much she pulls, she's unable to loosen it enough to peek inside. After fighting with it for a spell, Ochako gives up, lying limp on her rock with a pout on her face. She knows that humans scribble on paper all the time. What could be written there? Her pod had become accustomed to humans in their waters and had even begun learning their words. Ochako herself had found enough paper let loose from ships to be able to decipher it some. But even if she couldn't, she still would have enjoyed whatever awful depictions of wildlife were sure to be within the animal hide binding. But nay, she can't get it open. So, she sets it aside and turns to her next order of business, breakfast. She basks on the large rock on her stomach, cracking open her own delicious treasures from the afternoon prior. The clams had kept themselves shut tight all night and are still fresh enough to eat. Shattering the shell upon the stone, she parts the meat from the shell and swallows it whole, then tosses the empty shells over the side to sink to the sand below. She stops suddenly before smacking the next unfortunate clam into the rock. Movement in her periphery halts her, and she turns her head to get a good look. She knows there are no large animals on this beach. The largest would be a gull, if memory serves. But it's not. The creature is sitting in the surf facing the horizon, but its limbs are too long and spindly to be anything but. A human. Ochako isn't sure how she'd missed him. Then again, she hadn't been paying quite as much attention to the shore as she had been the lost objects underwater. Had he seen her? The question pierces through her chest and she stops breathing for a second to consider the possibility she may be in grave danger. If he had seen her, she's doomed, or so she'd been told. It was common knowledge amongst her pod mates and family that humans are bad news. There was a reason merfolk hid from humans, even at the expense of the best islands and reefs. Generational storytelling told of entire pods of merfolk killed by humans with extreme prejudice, and no one was brave enough to test the validity of such stories. It had always been better to just move on, except that fateful night. Ochako shakes her head. He hadn't seen her. If he had, he'd already be on her tail, wouldn't he? Instead, he is looking out towards the horizon. A mat of curly, green hair covers much of his head like pesky kelp, to the point that Ochako can barely see his white eyes. His clothes look wet, and hang off him in wrinkles. The white, long-sleeved shirt under his brown vest looks as if it swallows him. His trousers are torn, his shoes are missing, and Ochako can tell he isn't sure where to start as his body expands and shrinks with heavy, worried sighs. She knows he must have been on the ship that sank the night before, and now he's here alone, just like her. Ochako watches for a beat, keeping her eyes trained on him as she slips into the water behind her rock as quietly as possible. Just because he's alone doesn't mean much. He's still a human, and if he sees her, well, that's the end of her. So, she simply watches. He eventually gets up from his spot in the surf and walks back towards the forest of palms. For what, she isn't sure. Over the course of the day, he disappears and returns to the beach, back and forth, and Ochako can't make heads or tails about what he's trying to accomplish. She keeps away though, opting to peruse the island's southeast side for food in an effort to put distance between herself and the newcomer. Despite all she tells herself, though, she can't help but return to the edge of her rock to peek over the side at him. He's clumsy. She catches him stumbling in the sand, dropping what she guesses are materials for him to build something, and it becomes even worse in the water. It's clear his long legs aren't fashioned for swimming, and she holds in a giggle as she watches him flounder about in the surf. So many of his dives seem fruitless, too, and Ochako isn't sure if he's meaning to come up for breath so often, or if he just can't hold it for any significant amount of time. He's kind of pathetic. She wonders if all humans are like this, and, if so, how they could earn the fearsome reputation she'd learned over her whole life. This one, at least, might just get himself killed before the day is through. Still, he's charming. No matter how much he fails, he keeps trying at his tasks. By the end of the day, as the sun sinks into the horizon, staining the sky orange in its wake, he seems to have found exactly one clam and has learned to crack open a few coconuts that had fallen during the storm. As she watches him sit lonely on the beach with his paltry haul, she feels herself drawn to him, a tug of feelings she isn't familiar with aimed towards a human. He's hunched over in the sand and no doubt frustrated, with the way he forcefully tosses the empty clam shells back into the sea. She shouldn't care whether he survives, yet, she admits that she does. This island is unforgiving all alone. If the first storm hadn't dragged him down into the dark blue depths of the strait between her island and the next, the second one is sure to find another way. Ochako bites her bottom lip in indecision. What if he's harmless? What if he's not? Even a snail harbors a spike laced with venom. Though, humans are pretty weak without their weapons, and this one doesn't have much more than two legs to stand on. Guilt roils inside her. She can pinpoint those feelings of desolation on his face now, even from this distance. His eyes are wide and he shivers in the oncoming darkness. Ochako doesn't want to watch him die. Not if she could help it. He's a strange creature in a strange land out of the most unfortunate of circumstances. The storm had taken everything but his life from him, and it isn't clear yet if that was an act of mercy or cruelty. Perhaps it would only be cruel if she decides to ignore him, and in that way, Ochako feels as if the storm had been more cruel to her. If the human turned out to be as dangerous as she'd been told, then fate has doomed her by her own feelings. Feelings. Ochako doesn't want to be stupid, but the nagging want to help trumps the generations of horror stories told by the ghosts of her ancestors. She figures she can do this in a smart manner. She can hide from his view and become somewhat of an invisible guardian. Yes, Ochako decides that's the plan. After all, if she keeps herself hidden in the waves, then nothing can go wrong, right? Ochako slips away from her rock and under the surface to grab her pouch of clams from the seafloor. Keeping them underwater has kept them fresh all day, and although she'd love nothing more than to eat them herself, she knows her human charge hasn't eaten anything but coconut meat and a clam all day in the broiling tropical sun. She leaves herself two clams on her rock before diving, swimming out to the reef as the sun descends down into the horizon for the night. By the time she reaches the shore, the human has retreated just to the edge of the forest, his back to the waves as he tries to remove a palm frond from a stack he'd made earlier that day. Ochako comes up in the next wave, her heart pounding as she empties the pouch of clams right where he'd been sitting, then darts back into the sea. She slaps the surface hard with her tail flukes to get his attention before disappearing into the blue. Surfacing behind her rock back at the lagoon, she shakily lifts herself up onto the rock, the dark now sure to hide her form. She watches as the human stands at the edge of the surf, looking out towards the horizon searching for the source of the loud splash. He's already holding the clams in his arms, and the look of knowing in his face. The knowing that some other intelligent creature had delivered those delectable morsels to him is clear in the stern way his brows frame his eyes. Ochako ducks down, heart still racing from the near encounter. And yet, it's so exhilarating and entertaining. He looks so confused that she giggles to herself quietly, hiding the sound in the water. She looks again, lifting herself up out of the water and over the rock to watch him some more. He's begun walking back to his pile of fronds in the forest, and he settles down with a large rock to crack the live clams open. He's unskilled in it, but eventually gets them open. The sound of shells succumbing to a heavy stone echoes through the twilight. He seems to squirm a bit as the raw flesh slides down his throat, but Ochako finds it almost endearing how unaccustomed he is to her way of life. Life. There is hope for him yet. And that made her smile. Chapter 2. The next morning, and those thereafter, begin a new chapter for Ochako. Time on this island could be separated in two parts, before and after the human. Where before her days seemed to melt into a timeless, unending reel, now they are more structured as she follows the human's daily patterns. The human wakes early in the mornings, and she wakes to the sound of his clacking things together. Whether it be shells, rocks, or coconuts, he makes a racket. Perhaps she is so accustomed to the sound of the rolling waves and the calling gulls that the sharp sounds coming from his camp, even if faint, are enough to startle her awake. Either way, her days now start early. After he is content with his loud morning project, he disappears from sight. During the middle of the day, she suspects he's keeping his fair skin hidden from the sun's harsh rays in the jungle or his hut. In the late afternoon, he reemerges for dives and beach combing. Night is accompanied by a bright, orange fire and the aroma of cooked clams over the open flame before he lets it go out for the night. All throughout, keeping herself hidden from his curious eyes is like a game. The human isn't stupid. From the very first delivery of clams, he appears to be on edge, looking over his shoulder for a glimpse of whoever or whatever is secretly helping him. But that is all he's made aware of unbeknownst to him. Ochako does much more than feed her charge, she saves his life on more than one occasion. Before he goes on his own dives into the reef, she scours the area for the cone snail, the little landmine always somehow making it back to the human's beach the next day. She scoops him up in a clam shell and drops him at the edge of the reef past the wave breaks. Still, other dangers lurk in the reef. Stingrays hide under the sand, scorpion fish hang out between the coral branches, and jellies drift in the current like venomous ghosts. These are things Ochako thinks about daily, but, in her eyes, the human doesn't seem aware of them. She can't possibly empty the entire reef of its dangers, so she sticks closer and closer to him with each passing day. Her curiosity is also steadily getting the better of her. He is positively magnetic. Creeping closer to him, hidden behind coral heads or the natural blue fade of the water, she watches as the rolling current takes his dark, curly hair and swirls his oversized white shirt like the wings of a lionfish. She's come to recognize the pattern of ever-darkening freckles upon his cheeks and tries so hard not to giggle into bubbles as those cheeks expand to hold in his short breath. She tells herself that another inch closer is fine. Just another inch. Just another inch. He is looking for her, she knows this, but he has no idea what he's looking for. It is so easy to dart out of his periphery. Every inch gained melts the risk in the next one taken. Eventually, the want to inspect him up close begins to fight bitterly against her better judgment. Judgment. It isn't enough to help him. It isn't enough to watch him pitter-patter around the island and create new tools and a small camp for himself right on the shore. As the sun goes down, so does her mood. Her eyes follow him as he begins rubbing sticks together for the night's fire, and she sighs. She hangs off her rock, sinking down into her arms. The loneliness creeps in hardest at night when the simplest rush of the wind between the palms stirs memories she'd rather keep buried. This island has been hers for at least a few moon cycles, and everything before the green-haired human feels as if it were automated. Eat when hungry. Sleep when tired. Avoid these things. Watch out for this or that. And nothing else. She admits that it was mind-numbing. All that time alone, she never thought of herself really alone. Some false sense of hope had kept her mind on task and yet so asleep. With the human around, she's awoken from that automation. She's reminded that she hasn't spoken to anyone since the storm brought her here. One-sided conversations with a unicorn fish doesn't count. As he works on his fire, she realizes her island has been a lot like purgatory, some endless in between she can't escape. She has no idea where her pod is, or even if they still exist somewhere out there in the endless blue. The orange glow, not unlike the one that brought him here, alights in her periphery, and she jumps at it. It's bright against the muted colors of twilight, and that magnetic tug from before overwhelms her for a brief moment before receding. Settling back down, the feeling that she's been stuck on autopilot all this time becomes too great to bear. His presence just makes it so obvious. The want to make contact climbs into her throat and makes a nest there that chokes her. She swallows it dryly. The rhythm of the ocean goes on as it always had. It's unclear if it's the desolation or the hypnotic waves that drift her to sleep. Ochako watches the human less enthusiastically the next day as he dives for clams. He's decided to venture out further on the reef, much to Ochako's surprise, and he's taken by the waves, unbeknownst to him. Following, she doesn't quite recognize this patch, deeper and a little rockier, with corals that splay up and out like strange trees from the seafloor. Their bright orange color dredges up the reason Ochako avoids this place. Fire coral. The human seems to be blissfully unaware of the forest of burning hell he swum into as he paddles up and down from the white sand. Ochako isn't sure what to do. The fire coral won't kill him itself, but the pain may just be enough to drown such an inexperienced swimmer in deep water. He gets awfully close to a large, orange branch, and she flinches as his foot just misses it. Dread spreads like an infestation in her gut as she feels the current changing, the winds above coaxing the water to move in unexpected ways. His surfacing for the umpteenth time puts him in harm's way as a wind-driven wave pushes him straight into the arms of a large tree of fire coral. At first, he's calm as he goes to swim in the opposite direction. It's when he realizes he's caught on the coral somehow that panic becomes apparent in the way his eyes widen. He struggles, his pants ripping a bit more from his ankles as he kicks and thrashes to get out of it. Ochako knows he hasn't even felt the thousands of tiny harpoons or their venom yet, he's simply panicking that he's stuck underwater. As he dislodges himself, Ochako feels helpless. Her shoulders fall and her face contorts into a pained grimace as he grabs the coral with his bare hands to finally tear himself free. He can't see it, but it's obvious the fire coral has done its damage with the way the exposed skin of his hands and legs become bright red as he goes to the surface again for breath. It's just before he reaches it that the pain becomes obvious on his face. He doubles over, his hands curling into pained claws and his legs refuse to kick any longer. Those green eyes go wide before shutting tightly, and he grits his teeth so hard that Ochako can remember her own run-in with the coral as a child. But unlike her, he can't hold his breath long enough to let the initial shock of it pass. A large bubble escapes his mouth, his face looking desperate for the surface he can no longer reach. He twitches and falls limp before Ochako recognizes what's going on. He's drowning. Without a second thought, Ochako bursts towards him, her tail fin beating furiously to reach him. Her fear is nowhere to argue with her as she scoops him up and drags him upward. Breaking the surface, she takes her own breath and turns to him as his head lolls to the side. The thought that he must have inhaled some water hits her, and she gulps, worry paralyzing her for just a moment before she's beating her tail again, this time with a human in tow towards the beach. Ochako never knew she could swim so fast, but even as she rides a wave and lands on the hot beach sand, the thought that she's too late threatens to choke her. His whole body is still limp, and he makes no effort to sit up or speak, let alone breathe. Swallowing her fear for him, she fights against her own panic and saves him yet again. She isn't sure if humans and merfolk are built the same inside, but if he has lungs sort of like hers, then she figures treating him like a pod mate in trouble is the best she can do. She gently turns him onto his side, pulling his right arm towards her until he's on his left side. Next is the tail, the legs, rather, that she lifts and scoots under, resting his hip on her own before giving his back a few good hits with the side of a closed right fist. It's probably not what humans do, but it's what merfolk do, and it somehow works. After 3 hits to his back, the human coughs and spits his swallowed water onto the beach, whines and groans included. Relieved, Ochako scoots further until she is out from under him. He's still groaning and pressing his hand to his chest when she steals a glance at him. Wet tendrils of green hair stick to his face and his eyes are still shut as the pain, either from the fire coral or the burning of saltwater in his throat, continues to ravage his nerves. Ochako still isn't thinking about the risk she's taking. All she can think about is the limited space between them and how it soothes some underlying longing she wasn't aware of initially. Her heart still sinks. Glancing down, she can see the harsh redness from his calves down to his feet, and he groans again. There's only one solution she can think of to make the pain go away. She hops around, grasping a foot in her hand and pulls him further into the surf. The water meets her, and she dunks his feet into the waves in an effort to wash the loose stingers away. The venom is already working its dark magic, but if she could just. She feels eyes at the nape of her neck and the realization hits her. What she's been doing. Slowly, She turns her head and meets his gaze, the green eyes wide in what could only be described as a synthesis of confusion, disbelief, and shock. The venom doesn't seem to be taking up any of his attention anymore as he stares at her before making a sound. Escapes his throat, but it isn't followed by anything. He's dumbfounded, his eyes, like emeralds, stare into her own brown irises for a long, thoughtless moment. The call of a gull seems to split the seconds, and the moment to escape has already passed. Still, she jumps and goes to dive back into the water, her better judgment rushing to meet her panic. Panic. Her back is to him when he stops her with a strangled, "Wait." She obliges. She hears him wince, and all of the hints of fear, besides her pounding heart, melt away with that sound. Turning to face him, she sees him clutching his hands to his chest, the stingers from the fire coral still embedded in the skin there, making it raw and red and undoubtedly painful. Ochako sighs and softens. There is no point in leaving now, and besides, he still needs her. Then again, perhaps being this close could protect him better. Maybe she could tell him the things to avoid instead of waiting for him to collide with those things as he did today. Or she could regret it, and scold herself later if she doesn't pay the ultimate price for staying. Nervously, she takes his hands and dunks them in the next wave that moves under them, rubbing each hand gently in her own. Her fingers stroke the raw skin of his palms, her thumbs gliding over his knuckles. His hands are so much whiter than hers, and they're quite rough, as if he'd worked them for years before ever landing on her island. Much more importantly, though, they haven't done anything to harm her, even after his discovery of her. In fact, he seems to relax, the agitation from the pain melting into the water, leaving his hands resting softly in hers. Her eyes dart up sheepishly to his face. It's a bit embarrassing how nervous she is, can he feel her tremble? He doesn't seem to notice. His expression is odd, it's as if he's the one scared half to death. It sounds like he's having a hard time breathing, too. His lips are shut tightly into an unnerved squiggle, and it's actually he who is shaking the most of the two of them. Most importantly, it's his eyes that give his surprise away as they dart across her body, settling on her face only for a moment before catching a glimpse of her bright pink and yellow tail in the surf. He can't seem to focus, as if his mind can't put her upper and lower halves together as one. Then his eyes settle on her chest before he whips his whole head away from her, his face turning much too red much too quickly for a sunburn to explain it. She cocks her head. "You're a." He starts, but his voice is hoarse, the salt from the ocean probably still sitting unkindly in his throat. He clears it before speaking again. "Why, you're a mermaid. That's obvious enough, but she needs to remember, as often as she'd seen him, this was his first time seeing her. His revelation seems to come with some expectation that something was there in the blue looking out for him, but it's clear now he hadn't ever guessed that creature had been a mermaid. And he is still trying with all of his might not to look at her again, unless it's to feast his eyes on her tail, the very part of her anatomy most unlike his own. Unfortunately for him, his eyes also can't help but be drawn to the other bit of her that is unlike him. Ochako looks down at her chest and, finding nothing out of the ordinary, stares back up at him. Are you okay? The deep redness in his cheeks doesn't go away, but now he's staring intently into her face, a slight angle to his head and a widening of those eyes, as if he's been bamboozled again. He chokes. Why you see can speak. Better than you, I suppose, she answers curtly, although it's with a smile and a giggle. This human sure is strange. Why yes. I guess that's. I'm sorry. He can't seem to get the words out. Now it appears there are three things challenging his understanding of life in the universe. He takes his hands from hers, still stumbling over his own muttering, and begins to remove his brown vest. Well you see, mermaid. He stops himself, and then asks, do you, have a name? It's clear he is still overcoming his shock as he speaks, and Ochako is gentle, paying it no mind. Ochako. You have a name. Human. Why yes. I do my name is Izuku Midoriya. His jitters seem to begin melting away with a soft smile as the conversation goes on, and yet he still seems so utterly entranced. Two names. Oh. I suppose our cultures may be different, our livelihoods. I'm surprised you know so many human words. I have to guess merfolk have their own language. Oh, or do you use other sounds as dolphins might? Unless that's rude to ask. I don't know if you respect dolphins enough to feel comfortable being compared to one. He's muttering again, and although it's strange to her, Ochako can't say whether it's just a human quirk or not. Her thoughts usually stay inside her skull, and they don't typically come spilling from her mouth in this way. Nevertheless, the depth of his thoughts are truly intriguing, and she waits for him to stop himself. But that's not important, but yes, two names. I suppose if you have only one personal name, then you can just call me by mine, which is the Izuku part. Part. Okay, Izuku, she says, testing the name out on her tongue. Izuku sighs shakily, his eyes darting away from her. He's begun to remove his clothing once more, now unbuttoning his white, long-sleeved shirt. The shirt splits open, and Ochako is drawn to a small key fastened to a string around his neck. The brass shines in the sunlight and captivates her for a moment before he speaks again. I have so many questions for you, but, if you wouldn't mind. He hands his shirt to her and she stares, first at the wet clothing and then back at him for instructions. You see. Oh, Ochako. I can see that, nakedness isn't really something merfolk find awkward, but for humans, it's, really private. And, if you wouldn't mind putting this on, at least over your chest, I'd feel a lot less rude. Rude. Not respectful. Not nice. I feel like I'm not being nice to you, if that makes sense. She can see him tremble, the redness of his cheeks returning with a vengeance under his dark freckles. If it will make you feel better, then I can do that, Ochako says gently. She takes the shirt from him as he thanks her sheepishly, finding the sleeves before wrapping the rest behind her. She pulls the sleeves under her arms and around her chest before tying them into a knot. All done. He's now able to turn to her, his smile a bashful squiggle. His voice is soft and lowers as he finally calms down. Thanks. Thank you. I'm sorry. How do you know so many human words? How are we able to speak to one another? How? Ochako interrupts his muttering by placing a hand softly on his knee and moving it back and forth. He jumps out of his head to listen to her answer. We are familiar with humans in the area, she says, and leaves it at that. Although he's listening, nodding at the answer, he's become distracted with her tale once again. Ochako moves her head so her eyes line up with his and she giggles. She gets the curiosity. It isn't as if she isn't curious of him, too. Nevertheless, Izuku apologizes again, becoming flustered and waving his arms around to bat away his seemingly rude behavior. Ochako chuckles. He sure is interesting. I don't mean to stare, he says, but everyone thinks merfolk are just legends. I never thought for a minute that I'd ever discover one. And one that can speak. Or, no, discovering that you can speak and that you can speak very well. We can converse like this, it's truly fascinating. This is truly the discovery of a lifetime. No, of the century. Izuku's eyes seem to come alive and Ochako stares with a smile. His happiness is somehow infectious, even though she can't make out exactly what he's happy about. He is using a lot of words she doesn't recognize. Still, he continues to ramble as he puts his vest back on and then moves his hands over himself. I should record this. He cuts himself off when his hands have found nothing. The abrupt pause causes Ochako to cock her head in confusion again as Izuku feels around his person and looks in the surf for something. Upon realizing whatever he is looking for is lost, his shoulders sink and the light in his eyes goes out like a weak flame. Right, he says glumly, followed by a heavy sigh. My notebook went missing in the storm. Ochako swallows. The stark shift in his mood is enough to make her own feelings follow, and she's wallowing in disappointment alongside him. She wants to bring that smile back so badly, but she doesn't know him well enough to even try. She's also tired of being out of the loop. Notebook. Ah. He stammers, pulling himself out of self-pity to answer her. Do you know what paper is? Yes. Oh, good. Well, it's a lot of papers, a collection of papers, and it's clear to her he's considering every word he chooses. And, they're all tied together with string. Mine is leather bound, covered in an animal's skin that you've probably never seen before. And it's got a lock on it that only I can open with this key. Izuku touches the key dangling from his neck. The image of the object she'd found on the seabed weeks ago springs to her mind. Could they be the same thing? Only one way to find out. Ochako beams with the thought. Perhaps this is how she could bring back his smile. She slides into the surf and dives, making a beeline east for her secluded lagoon. When she comes up for air, she hears Izuku shout to her, his confusion evident in the way his brows are furrowed. He tries to keep up with her on the shore and stumbles in the sand. She giggles. Does he think she won't come back? Once she's past the rock face of the lagoon, he's unable to follow her, unless he'd prefer to swim or climb the cliffs. Ochako doesn't mind. She can hear him shouting something from beyond the rock, and she yells back to give her a moment. Sliding up on the secret beach of her lagoon, she pulls herself through the sand to a crevice in the rock. The tide doesn't come up this far, so it's a perfect little hole to keep her human treasures, including what she is now positive is called a notebook. Notebook. She removes the locked, leather-bound pages from the nook, and whips around to return to her human still calling to her. She's now aware that most things that belong to humans are probably best kept dry, so she holds the notebook above the waves as she circles around to the other side of the lagoon wall. Izuku is frantic on the beach, she can tell, but he relaxes upon seeing her again with a dash of curiosity as to what she's brought him. Coming in with a wave, Ochako presents the notebook, a bit tattered, probably still waterlogged, but as safe as she could keep it. His face lights up again and Ochako feels elation well up into her chest. She doesn't take any time to analyze it, not when Izuku happily takes it from her grasp and removes the key from his neck. The little bronze piece fits perfectly into the matching bronze keyhole on the notebook, and it just as easily snaps open with a click. Suddenly, the pages see sunlight again, and Izuku's happy visage changes to one that's overwhelmingly grateful. I can't believe you found it, he says slowly, his eyes stuck to the pages as he flips through it. I thought it was lost forever. Gosh, and the words are still legible, too. He seems to feel her moving in close to take a look and he turns the book so that they can both see the contents. Most of what Ochako can make out are scribbles. She knows the scribbling is written human words, but she can't decipher most of them, especially the longer ones. The details are very different than what she's been exposed to in the past. Between the paragraphs are plants and animals drawn in the same black ink. Ochako recognizes many of them: a gull, clownfish, stingrays, spotted dolphins, a palm tree. She points them out to Izuku, who gives her the human names gently, as if she's learning of them for the first time. In return, she commends his drawings. They're certainly better than she'd ever seen on paper scraps lost to the wind. That's a huge honor, he giggles, to have a mermaid tell me I've drawn the animals in her world so well. Why draw them, though? Ochako asks. Don't you see them a lot on your ship? Some of them, yes, Izuku says. I draw them to show other humans who have never seen them. Ochako stares. She has no concept of the lives of humans. As far as she was aware, humans lived on ships. Izuku seems to assume she might have that preconception and explains that humans actually live on land in homes made of stone or wood thousands upon thousands of miles away. It blows her world wide open. Ochako was never worldly, her pod had no reason to traverse the open ocean. The big blue beyond the atolls was a deep, dark desert that promised certain death to any merfolk that strayed too far into it. According to Izuku, humans crossed oceans all the time in search of discoveries like the ones recorded in his notebook. They call me a naturalist, Izuku went on. My job is to find new animals and plants, and if I can't take any back home with me as samples, then I draw them for other people to see. Ochako could tell there was more, but, given her limited knowledge of his world and his language, it was the best they could do for now. Yet, the wonder of his life intrigued her. It now all made sense why he wasn't good at swimming and had limited knowledge of the perils that lie in wait among the coral heads. He really lived on land. The ship he had come into the atoll on was simply an extension of it, allowing him to explore the distant South Pacific that he now made very clear was so far from his home. He'd traveled for 8 moon cycles, what he called months, to land at this very shore. An air of wistfulness creeps into his voice just before he falls silent. The flip of each page seems to grow heavier. Ochako feels it in her chest, that homesickness. Although merfolk do not have permanent residencies as she just learned humans do, she can still appreciate the loneliness of being apart from family and the familiarity of a place. And the unending uncertainty of being trapped here. I wonder if anyone else survived, he wonders out loud. His voice sounds impossibly far away. The pictures and words on the pages mean less and less as he passes by them faster, as if he's looking for the answer to his predicament there on the parchment. After a pause, he stops, as if suddenly remembering he is with company. Ochako studies him, and he bashfully apologizes before getting up from the sand. He closes the book and tucks it under his arm. We didn't really get a chance, but I'm assuming it's been you who's been bringing me those clams. Ochako gives him a weak smile and a reserved nod. What she's done for him seems meaningless in the grand scheme of things. Thank you, he says, chasing away her doubt. He rubs his hands together, still a bit red and irritated from the fire quarrel. You've really saved me. I would definitely be one step from death by now if not for you. Or rather, definitely dead as a doornail after today's mishap. The idiom is lost on her, but Ochako recognizes the sincerity and lets herself melt. She's done something good despite her fears, and she feels the reward coming in his friendship, at least for the time he's here. There is no guarantee on his continued survival. The island and its surrounding reefs hide many dangers. Perhaps his people will come looking for him as she hopes her pod will do for her one day. Until then, she marvels at the unlikely partnership. He seems to toss his sadness away as he looks out towards the horizon with an air of confidence and courage. It's past the middle of the day, but the sun will continue to shine for many more hours at full strength. Izuku reminds her of it and goes to leave for his hut on the beach before turning around as a thought enters his mind. Maybe this evening, you could teach me to hunt for my own clams, he asks sheepishly. He explains he'd prefer not to be such a burden to her, followed by more endearing rambling she can barely understand. But, she smiles, lifting her tail from the waves happily. Of course, where stories live, discover now.